Mary Celeste disappearance. All theories, from the logical to the insane. Imagine you're a sailor in 1872, steering your ship through the Atlantic, when a derelict vessel appears on the horizon. Its sails flutter aimlessly, and no crew comes on deck to greet you. You hail the ship, no answer. As you draw closer, an eerie silence hangs in the salt air. This was the reality for Captain David Morehouse of the brig Dei Gratia on December 5, 1872. He spotted the American brigantine Mary Celeste adrift off the Azores, seemingly abandoned. When his men boarded the Mary Celeste, they found a perplexing scene. The ship was completely intact and seaworthy, with ample food and water supplies, and a cargo hold full of 1,701 barrels of alcohol. Yet every soul on board had vanished without a trace. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah and young daughter Sophia, and 7 experienced crewmen, 10 people in total, were simply gone. There was no sign of struggle, no obvious calamity. The ship was just sailing itself, a ghost on the water, with no one left to tell the tale. Before we go further on this voyage, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more intriguing mysteries, and hit the like button if maritime enigmas pique your interest. It really helps us bring you deep dives into stories like this one. Stepping onto the Mary Celeste that winter day, the boarding party found details that only deepened the mystery. The ship's single lifeboat was missing, suggesting the people had gotten off. One of the 2 pumps was disassembled, and about 3.5 feet of water sloshed in the bilge. Not ideal, but not enough to sink a sturdy ship of this size. The crew's personal belongings and valuables were still in their cabins, undisturbed. In the captain's cabin, charts lay scattered as if left in a hurry, but the important documents and instruments, like the captain's navigational tools and most of the ship's papers, were gone, presumably taken by Captain Briggs. The galley had no fresh meal prepared or any sign of imminent disaster. There was no evidence of fire and no blood or obvious violence on deck. The last entry in the logbook was dated November 25, 1872, over a week earlier, and recorded nothing unusual, positioned near the Azores Islands, on course. Sometime after that routine morning entry, something happened that caused everyone on board to abandon ship suddenly. Why would an experienced captain and crew leave a perfectly sound vessel in the middle of the ocean? That is the question that has haunted people for over a century. With no official explanation, speculation ran rampant. Everyone had a theory, from the reasonable to the ridiculous. Early investigations and suspicions. The first official investigation into the Mary Celeste was conducted in Gibraltar, where the salvagers brought the ship. Authorities immediately looked for signs of foul play. Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General presiding over the inquiry, became convinced that a crime had occurred on board. He imagined a mutiny or murder scenario. Perhaps the crew had broached the alcohol cargo, gotten drunk, and in a frenzy killed Captain Briggs, his family, and those loyal to him, then fled in the lifeboat. This lurid theory gained traction in some newspapers. Even the New York Times speculated that some of the men probably obtained access to the cargo and were thus stimulated to the desperate deed. In other words, a drunken crew uprising. It made for scandalous headlines, but it didn't match the facts. For one, the alcohol was industrial alcohol, likely not drinkable, and certainly not palatable. Briggs's crew were all hand-picked, trustworthy men with strong reputations, not the sort to mutiny without cause, and Briggs himself was known as a fair, able captain. Crucially, there were no signs of violence or struggle on the ship. The reddish stains that panicked investigators turned out not to be blood at all. And if pirates or mutineers had been responsible, they did a poor job of it. The cargo and all valuables were left untouched. Real pirates would have looted the ship, and mutineers would probably have stolen the ship itself, or at least made off with money and supplies. None of that happened. Solly Flood also entertained ideas of insurance fraud or conspiracy. Perhaps, he thought, Captain Briggs and Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia had colluded in some scheme to fake a disaster and split the salvage reward. Or maybe the ship's owner had hired a crew with malicious intent. However, no evidence ever surfaced for such plots. The Dei Gratia was sailing well behind on a slower ship, making a secret rendezvous or ambush implausible. And Briggs was a religious, devoted family man who had left behind a young son on shore, hardly a candidate for vanishing on purpose for a payout. After months of inquiry, the court found no proof of foul play. The salvors received only a token salvage payment, and the crew's disappearance remained completely unexplained. Wild theories set sail. With no clear answers from the authorities, people's imaginations filled the void. Over the years, the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew has inspired some truly bizarre explanations. Let's chart a course through some of the more outlandish ideas that have been proposed, where the line between serious hypothesis and science fiction sometimes blurs. One early suggestion was an attack by a sea monster. In an era when the ocean's depths were largely mysterious, a few writers speculated that a giant squid or octopus might have risen from the sea and snatched the crew off the deck one by one. Perhaps, they mused, a colossal creature even dragged away the ship's lifeboat. Needless to say, no evidence of giant tentacles was ever found, and the Mary Celeste itself showed no damage consistent with a battle against a leviathan. The sea monster theory, while thrilling, doesn't hold water. What about visitors from above? Another fanciful explanation has been alien abduction. Some have whimsically suggested that extraterrestrials might have beamed the Mary Celeste's crew aboard a UFO, leaving the ship intact. It's an entertaining sci-fi twist, but of course there's not a shred of evidence for it. The Mary Celeste soon gained a reputation as a haunted ship. Sailors later claimed to feel an eerie presence on board or even to see ghostly lights and apparitions. Such tales, whether born of superstition or imagination, cemented the Mary Celeste's legend as a cursed ghost ship. Another theory turned to a more chemical kind of horror: poisoned food. Some wondered if the crew's bread had been contaminated by ergot, a toxic fungus. Ergot poisoning can cause hallucinations and irrational behavior. Could the officers and crew have been driven mad, abandoning ship in a delirium induced by tainted rye bread? It's a wild idea, and it pretty much falls apart under scrutiny. The boarding party from the Dei Gratia ate from the Mary Celeste's stores during the voyage to Gibraltar, including the bread, and none of them fell ill or insane, so scratch the hallucinogenic bread theory. In 1913, for example, an imposter claimed he'd been a stowaway on the Mary Celeste, and that everyone had been eaten by sharks during a bizarre swimming stunt. This tall tale was a complete hoax, but some people were briefly fooled until it was debunked. Even famous writers added to the myth. An early short story by Arthur Conan Doyle invented a murderous mutiny on a ship eerily similar to the Mary Celeste, and some readers mistook it for a genuine explanation. In truth, these colorful stories tell us more about the public's fascination than about any reality. By now you might be shaking your head at how far people went to dream up explanations. Sea monsters, aliens, cursed bread, secret shark attacks. As entertaining as these ideas are, none of them have a lick of solid evidence. They were speculations born from frustration and the human love of a sensational story. The Mary Celeste mystery became a blank canvas for every wild maritime legend. But if we set aside the fantasies, what plausible explanations remain? If you're enjoying this voyage through the unknown, please give this video a thumbs up and let us know in the comments which theory you find most intriguing or crazy. Your support helps us keep investigating fascinating mysteries like this one. Toward a plausible explanation. Stripped of supernatural and conspiratorial frills, the Mary Celeste case likely boils down to an unfortunate chain of natural events and human decisions. Modern maritime historians and researchers tend to agree that some extraordinary emergency must have panicked Briggs and his crew, yet one that left the ship itself mostly unharmed. Abandoning a ship at sea is an almost unthinkable last resort. For Captain Briggs, a deeply experienced, level-headed sailor, to order everyone into a small lifeboat, he must have truly believed his ship was about to blow up or sink beneath them. So, what could that be? One scenario begins with the Mary Celeste's environment. We know from the log that she endured heavy weather for 2 weeks after leaving New York. She was last recorded near the Azores. Rough seas could have caused some damage or leaks. When the ship was found, the crew had rigged a makeshift sounding rod, used to measure water in the hold, and left it on deck, hinting that they were actively worried about flooding. Investigators later discovered that one of Mary Celeste's pumps was clogged and taken apart. Why? The ship had recently been extensively refitted, and on its previous voyage it carried coal. Coal dust and debris from the refit could have choked the pumps. If the pumps malfunctioned, Captain Briggs would have no reliable way to tell how much water was in the hull. Combine faulty pumps with the ship possibly taking on water from storm damage, and Briggs might have suspected Mary Celeste was slowly sinking, even if in reality she wasn't beyond saving. The 3.5 feet of water found in the hold upon discovery wasn't dangerous for a ship that size, but Briggs wouldn't have known exactly how bad it was. It's easy to imagine his concern with his wife and baby daughter on board as well. Now layer on the most critical factor, the cargo of alcohol. Those 1,701 barrels of alcohol were a new type of cargo for Briggs. He was actually a teetotaler, and reportedly a bit anxious about carrying such a volatile load. Sure enough, when the ship was later inspected, they found that 9 barrels were empty. All 9 happened to be made of red oak, a wood more porous and leak-prone than the rest. So it's likely that alcohol had been slowly seeping and evaporating, filling the hold with combustible fumes. Imagine the smell and worry that might cause. It's plausible the crew heard or even felt something, maybe ominous rumblings or odd sounds below deck as the vapors built up. In fact, one theory holds that there was a sudden flash fire or pressure wave explosion in the hold, essentially a giant alcohol-fueled whoomp that blew open hatches or rattled the ship without actually igniting a lasting fire. Modern experiments have shown that alcohol vapor can indeed cause a flash explosion that produces a burst of flame and pressure without leaving burn marks or scorching. If something like that happened on the Mary Celeste, it would have utterly terrified everyone on board. They'd be staring at the open hatch, smelling burning alcohol, expecting at any second the whole ship to erupt into a fireball. At that moment, Briggs would have had a dire choice: stay on a ship that might be about to explode or get everyone off onto the lifeboat quickly. Being a cautious and caring captain, it's very possible he decided to abandon ship as a precaution, at least until they could be sure the threat was over. They were near enough to islands that they might have hoped to reach land, or at least stay safe just off the ship's side. So, the order comes. Launch the yawl, the small lifeboat. In a hurry, they grabbed the essential navigation tools and documents. That's why those were missing later. And perhaps some basic provisions. They don't even take all their coats or personal items. This isn't a planned desertion, it's an emergency. They pile into the lifeboat, a small open boat that's a tight fit for 10 people. Likely they tied a strong rope from the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste, keeping a connection so they could return quickly once they felt safe. Tragically, if that was the plan, it went terribly wrong. A critical piece of evidence was the discovery of a frayed line trailing over Mary Celeste's side. It suggests the lifeboat was attached by a rope, but that rope either snapped or was cut loose at some point. Perhaps while the crew sat in the lifeboat waiting, a gust of wind filled the Mary Celeste's sails that hadn't been fully secured. The ship, with no one at the helm, caught the breeze and began to move. If the tow line parted suddenly, say it was hastily knotted or it chafed against the hull until giving way, the Mary Celeste would have sailed off like a ghost, leaving the lifeboat bobbing in its wake. The captain and crew, including 2 small children, would have been left adrift in a tiny boat in the open Atlantic. A lifeboat that size, overloaded and without shelter, wouldn't last long if the weather turned foul. In fact, reports indicate the weather did worsen not long after. The seas could have risen and easily swamped a low-lying lifeboat. Heartbreakingly, not a trace of that yawl or the people in it was ever found. They almost certainly perished at sea. This scenario of a frightening but false alarm, explosion or sinking, prompting a panicked evacuation, followed by a calamitous separation, is considered the most plausible explanation for the Mary Celeste tragedy. It neatly accounts for all the clues on record: a ship left in good order but empty, the missing lifeboat and navigational instruments, the opened hatches, likely opened to vent fumes, the abandoned sounding rod on deck, and that broken rope. It explains why even a veteran captain like Briggs would take the extreme step of leaving his ship, not because they were foolish or violent, but because they truly thought they faced an invisible killer in the hold or a hull about to give out. In the end, it was a fateful misjudgment. Briggs's one mistake may have been underestimating the risk of the lifeboat itself. Conclusion: an enduring sea. Mystery. In the end, the Mary Celeste's voyage into legend has outlasted the people who sailed on her. While the explosion and lifeboat scenario is the front-running theory today, we will likely never know for certain exactly what chain of events sealed the fate of the crew. No log entries, no messages in a bottle, no survivors ever surfaced to provide closure. The Atlantic Ocean kept the secret. That very lack of closure is what keeps the story alive in our imagination. The saga of the Mary Celeste endures as a cautionary tale and a compelling puzzle. It reminds us that the sea, for all our attempts to tame and understand it, can still swallow entire ships and their crews without so much as a witness. It's poignant to consider that in this mystery, there may have been no villain at all, no pirates, no mutiny, no murderous intrigue. Captain Briggs and his crew likely fell victim to a cascade of natural events and split-second decisions. In short, a tragic accident. They did what they thought was right to protect themselves and their loved ones, and it backfired in the worst way. The Mary Celeste remains one of history's greatest maritime mysteries, a ghost ship tale that still captivates our collective curiosity more than 150 years later. It remains a haunting reminder that some chapters of history remain unwritten and some ocean secrets remain unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Mary Celeste disappearance. If you enjoyed this journey through a real-life maritime mystery, please subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next investigation. And let us know in the comments what you think happened out there on the open sea in 1872. Which theory do you believe, or do you have a new one? Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
Dead quiet.